Hello, good morning. Welcome everyone. My name is Kathy Hart. I'm at the beautiful ACC Senior Services Center, and we're going to learn how to do some very basic watercolor today. I am also involved in the Renaissance Society at Sac State, which is a partner organization for ACC. We are both community organizations that serve people who are interested in lifelong learning and just, expanding their horizons. So we've got a number of people on that are Renaissance members, and we also have people from around the world. This was posted on Eventbrite, and I know we had several folks from the UK and possibly other countries. If you are from a country outside the US, would you just put in chat where you're watching us from? So this class will be recorded and then posted to the ACC YouTube channel. If you registered on either Eventbrite or through Renaissance, I'll be sending you a direct link to the recording. So let's talk briefly about what supplies you'll want for our lesson today. I'm a big believer that everyone is an artist. Everyone can make beautiful art. And you don't need to spend $200 to get supplies. So let's talk about, well, what can you use? I have a very basic, this is really a beginner level watercolor palette that I will be using for this class. I have other watercolors that I use for other projects, but I just want to show folks you don't need something really big and involved and expensive to start. I am going to be using watercolor paper, but you can use either cardstock or regular paper. I'll be honest with you, watercolor paper is called that for a reason, and it does a better job, and you can do more if you're using watercolor paper. But what I'm using today will be just a basic student grade watercolor. You'll want some water because you'll rinse your brush in between your colors. You'll also I have two brushes with me today. One is a 6, and I think the other one might be a 6. I can't find the actual number on it, but they're just medium-sized brushes. We're not doing a large painting today. We're going to do a fairly small painting. I'll show you at the end what I do with these small paintings. Even when I just do something simple, I like for it to be useful. So I make cards and send a lot of cards, give cards away. People love to get handmade artwork, and to me, a card is a wonderful way of sending something to a person to let them know you're thinking about them. Okay, Sean, we'll probably want to go overhead now because I'm going to show a couple of We're going to do some tulips. It's very basic. These are just examples. So this is a slightly larger one. What I am going to teach, I like to teach some technique, not just let's fill in, a crayon. We're not just going to color something in. I want to teach you at least a couple of techniques. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about perspective of flowers, and I'll talk about this in more detail. You can see that the reason I can see each petal is I'm making use of this white space in between the petals. That will give me definition. So that's what we're going to do today. I've been practicing just to make sure it's a fairly simple drawing. So let's talk about how did we draw tulips when we were young? Probably something like this.
Yes.
I'm sure most of us remember doing something along that line. And you know what's interesting is when we did that, we thought we were fabulous artists. And you were. But we're going to make it a little more sophisticated than that today. But it's not difficult. So I want to show you what I'm talking about when I say perspective. When you look at a bouquet of flowers, or even a field of flowers, or even 3 or 4 flowers, chances are they are not lined up exactly the same way. You'll see the petals differently. So what do I mean by that? Well, look at this one on the top. This one, this flower is more in the center, and I can see a little bit on the side of the I have a petal off to the left, a petal off to the right. It's slightly smaller, and I can still see a little bit in the back. And then again, here's still a slightly different perspective. This one has a bigger petal more to the right, and then one off to the left, a tiny bit there to the right, and a little in the back. None of these are right or wrong. They're just different examples of how you can draw it. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to do it in pen so you can see it in the film. Go ahead and take your paper out now, and you will in pencil be drawing the buds. I tend to do my flowers first, and then I'll do my stems after. So let's just talk about, and you can actually do this on your watercolor paper in pencil. Let's talk about some different perspective. So if I want to make, let me put it here so you can see that. Okay, so if I want to make this one, I'm going to do a center, and I'm going to kind of have this one be a little ruffly. We're not trying to do a botanically perfect tulip. We're just trying to do something when your eye catches it, you'd say, oh, that's a tulip. So I've done a center oval. And then I'm going to come a little bit off to the right and a little bit off to the left. So I'm doing a wavy top. You could do more of a pointy top. I'm just going to do a little bit of a ruffle. And I'm going to bring it down to the base. And I'll do that same thing on the left side. A little bit of a wavy top and down. And now I want to have something that is the illusion of petals behind these petals. So because mine are wavy, I'm just going to do a little bit of wavy at the top. And I have room for one more right there. So that's a very simple, I'll put the stem in at the base just for perspective. So that's just a very simple example of how to do a tulip. So let's try a slightly different perspective. Let's take this one and rotate it slightly, and actually it's more of a bud. So I'm going to start with on the left side. An oval. So I'm doing this middle one. And then on the right side, I'll come a little bit out and up and bring that down. And just do a tiny little bit for the petal that's right behind that. That one's a little harder to see. And I'll have my stem. And how did I draw this? Last one on the bottom, this is a bigger petal that's rotating a little bit to the right. So I'm going to do an oval. And then I'll do a thinner one on the left-hand side. And bring that down. And then just part of the petal on the right with a small little bump there for the behind. So that's giving a little more, it's just a little bit more realistic than if you had all of your tulips look like this. So we're just trying to give a little bit of difference in your bouquet. Now I have an example of how to put your bouquet together. So just one hint is that odd numbers of flowers tend to look better. That's true in a real flower bouquet or in a painting. So I've done two different ways. I've done three. I'm not saying that you would do both of those today. You do one or the other. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what you might want to do. So you can have them, just kind of as though they were coming out of the ground. This actually could be over the ground. The big difference between the two is that I've crossed this one over with my stem. So however you want to do it, and you could do it, of course, completely differently. Like here are some of the examples of my practice ones. So I've got, that one has 3. I'm going to do something very similar to this today. This one has 5. And that one tulip is actually crossing 2. This one also has 5. None of them are crossing. So you can see there, again, not right or wrong, it's just different. And this one just has 2. Not as pleasing to the eye as 3 or 5, but still fine. Remember, we're here to have fun and to enjoy the process. Okay, so if you haven't finished drawing your tulip flowers, go ahead and do that on your paper. I have lightly drawn mine in pencil. Now, when you watercolor over pencil, you cannot erase it. So you want this, it's okay to have pencil lines through watercolor. Lots of artists have it that way. But if you really don't want it to show, you just go back in over your pencil marks and you just lightly erase maybe areas that are a little bit darker so you don't have as much coming through the watercolor. So I want to talk about how do we have this between the petals, how do you keep this white line? All right, let's see, can you see that? There we go. Okay, can you see that? Between the petals, I've got a little bit of white. That's to differentiate. I think you can see it a little better on this one. See how I've got that white space? Let's just talk about how you do that. So what you want to do, if you have dry watercolors, is you want to activate your paints, which means you just put a little bit of water in there. And I do, for a moment, want to talk about your watercolor paints. You can use it directly from the palette. That will work. But one of the beautiful things about watercolor is its translucent ability. So I'm going to take some of this darker pink. I'm going to move it over to this well that is just, it came with my palette. And I'm going to add some water to that, because one of the beautiful things with watercolor is the ability to layer. So you can have some parts darker than others. I mean, if I'm just on regular paper now, if I did this, that'd be fine. It's actually, you could layer on top of that. But if it's a lighter color, I can come back in and add more pigment and then do some shading and all kinds of wonderful things that, that you can do with watercolor that it's just a little different if you were using acrylic. So let's talk about that white space. I'm just going to do a basic tulip flower. So I'm going to do a big oval. This is just my practice, so you can see what I'm doing. And then I would just color this in. And I'm on regular paper, so it's going to be streaky, but I don't care. I'm just trying to show you this technique. Okay, so I've got one petal. Now, I'm going to go on my left side and I'm going to do a partial petal. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, right along this line, I'm going to leave a little bit of white space. So I'm not going to just put the paint right next to each other, because then there won't be any, it won't distinguish it as a petal. So what I mean by that is, let me do the outside first. So I'll come up and bring it down on the outside. Okay, rather than just filling that in, I'm going to leave some white space between this petal on the left and the one I just filled in. Okay? So this is not a great example, but I'm just trying to show you the technique. So you're leaving just that little hint of white, and if it goes over on part of the flower, that's okay. That's okay. But that's what we're going to be doing to give that distinction between petals. So go ahead and get your colors ready. I'm going to use two different pinks. I'm going to use a lighter pink first, and I'll come back in with that darker pink. And I'm going to paint 3 tulips. And because I want to give a little bit of time between each petal, I want to give this particular, let's say if I did the center one first, I want to give that a little bit of time. I'm going to be going from like one petal on this tulip, then I'm going to do another petal on the next tulip, and that allows a little bit of time for drying, so I'm not going to be blending the petals as much. So I have a fairly small piece. I've already penciled in my flower bulb, the heads, the flower part, and I'm going to start, because I'm right-handed, I'm going to start on the top left. I've got 3 flowers that I'm doing, 1, 2, 3. Because I don't want to move my hand over wet, as little as possible, I'm going to start with my top left. And I'm just going to fill in one of the petals. And mine is a very light pink that I'm doing right now first. Don't be afraid to turn the paper. If it makes it easier for you to paint one particular way, just rotate that paper so you continue to paint the way I tend to paint left to right. So that's how I want my paper to be aligned. You can always dab if you've got too much water on your brush, just dab it on your paper towel. Okay, so I've got a good start here. I think what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to go right into my darker pink. That's the color I chose. And because it's still damp, I'm going to put in some darker pink here at the bottom. You can see it kind of explodes out. And just soften that a bit on the edge. I want a little bit of a variation in color. So I do it while it's still damp. So the color moves, the watercolor moves. Again, a beautiful reason to use watercolor. Now I'm going to go to my next one and do a petal on the middle flower. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do my lighter color, just basically filling it in from what the pencil drawing that I have. I'm just filling that paint in. Keep in mind that your watercolor paint will always dry lighter than what you initially put on the paper. It's going to be lighter. So I've got my first coat, and now I'm going to take some of my darker pink, and I'm going to put it at the bottom. You could put it at the top, you could do whatever you want. You could not do that part, whatever you want. So what I'm doing is I feel like I've got a little too much water on there, and so I'm dabbing it off on my paper towel. And then I'm just blending that darker color in with the lighter pink. Okay, and that's one petal in that flower. And I'm going to go ahead and go to my third, which is right here. And I'm going to do that one petal with the light pink. Again, I like to move my paper because I tend to paint in one direction better. I just feel like I have more control. Okay, so let me see if you can see this. I've got a little too much paint in one spot. So how do you lift paint? You dry your paintbrush and then you just go back in and your paintbrush will suck up that extra water. So that's important. You don't want a pool of paint. So I've got some light pink on mine. I'm going to now add some of this darker pink and then blend that out. Got a little too much. Just use your paper towel to take off any extra paint or any extra water. Now I'm going to rinse. I didn't really need to do that, but I did because I'm using the same color. I'm really only going to use I'm going to use a pink, a darker pink, a green, and a darker green. So it's really only two colors. Some are just a little deeper. You can use whatever color you want. So I'm going to go back in to my top left flower and I'm going to do the two on the side. And I'm going with my lighter pink, and like I showed you here, I'm going to try to leave some white space in between my petal so it defines the petal. Now because I rinsed my brush, I have a lot of water in my brush, so I had to take some of that water off. Now I'm going in and I'm very carefully, you can always add color. You can take it off too, but it's a little trickier. So I'm just carefully going alongside and I'm trying to leave just a hint of white. Very hard to see on the camera. But there's a tiny little white line. For those of you who are in the class with me, you can see it if you want after the class, but it's just a little sliver. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side now with my light pink. And I'm going to go in with the darker pink just here at the base of the one on the right and add just a little deeper color there. And we're going to continue with that. I'm not going to do my back petals because I just did the two sides, so I want to give it a little chance to dry. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my middle flower and do the one on the right. Again, leaving a very, very thin line between the petal on the right Sean, do you know what that is? Very thin white line. And in my drawing, I have more of the petal. I can definitely see the base on my petal, so I'm going to add just a hint of this darker pink. And then I'm going to kind of spread that out. And again, I'm not going to do the back of this particular flower yet. But I will go in now to my bottom flower. Same thing, I'm going to leave a very thin line between the petal on the left and the right and my center petal for that definition. There's a couple of ways to kind of help your watercolor dry. You can just, if it's a fairly warm day or your house is warm, you can just kind of fan it. Or you can use a hair dryer. I've got an embosser here, which is basically a dryer. You don't have to do this. I'm just trying to make sure I've got my petals are dry. But you can always just wait a moment or two. It usually doesn't, unless you've really pooled a lot of water, it doesn't take long. So let's fill in these two back petals. That's what's on my drawing. So I'm going to take the pink again. I'm going to leave a little white space in between where they would go together, just to try to define those petals. I'm going to do all three of the ones that I have in the back. You don't want a really big white line, just a hint of a white line. And I'm going to go ahead and just see what this looks like. I'm going to add a little bit, now my petals are dry, so I'm going to just see how this works. I'm going to do a little streaks up, and if I don't like it, I'll just blend it in. That looks okay. So I'm just taking the very tip. If you don't add much pressure, depending on your brush, you're going to have a thinner line. So that's what I've done. Okay. Yeah, it's not coming out too great on the camera. A little lower? What I did is just made, here I can do it on this, I'll show you. I've just taken paint on my brush, and now I'm hardly any pressure at all, and I'm just going up, whoop, just swooping up. The more I press, the fatter the line. That's what I'm doing. So I have some faint lines with this darker color on my petals. I'll go ahead and do that in the middle. Remember, it always dries lighter. Can't really see it. That one's dried already, but you can see I've got some lines that I've added on those tulips.
Can you show us how you do the back petals?
Sure. Let me show you on this one. I just had almost like a little bump. And then I just bring it down, keeping some white space. Does that help? So it's
Yes,
just
thank you.
You bet. Just like a little bump back there. Okay, while you're finishing up, I'm going to go ahead and mix some green. So I am just going to take some green and probably add some blue in there. Again, I'm doing it in the little well. Actually, I have a couple. I have a very, very light green and a blue green. So you can always check if you've blended your colors. I've mixed it up and it's like, oh, is that the color I want? You know, okay, what's the other color? Okay, that looks a little, all right, yeah, that'll be fine. So what do you do if you have, let's say, a dark green and it's too bright? How do you tone it down? So you can either add some brown, that'll make it muted, make it look a little bit more like a natural green, or if you add the opposite color. So if you had green and you added red, that's going to actually make brown. So you just want a tiny, tiny hint of red in your green. But I'm going to use this blue-green for my stalk and for part of the leaves, and I'll probably just do a little bit of highlights in a lighter green. So first what I'm going to do is make the, just kind of under my blossom. I'm not going to have it just go straight. It's going to be a little bit higher on the right and the left side, and then not really a triangle exactly, but it'll be thicker up at the top and then come down into a stem. So what I mean by that is I'll do my top right. So I'll start on my left and then my right, and see how I'm just going to kind of make that as though it's really kind of cradling the blossom. And then I'm bringing it down. I'm going to change the direction of the paper because it's easier for me to swipe. Oh, but you know what? I want to look at directionality. So let's see. Whoop. So I'm just doing that, and I'm coming all the way down to the bottom. And mine is a very light line because I'm going to do a couple of layers and do some different things with it. Okay, so that's one stem. Again, the top is kind of cradling the petal. You might notice that this second one that I did, I've got it kind of curving a bit. It's actually kind of hard to find flowers that are perfectly straight, so I'm putting a little bit of variation there with a slight curve in my second one. And then I'm going to do my last one. Okay, so that's just my first coat, very light, very translucent. I want to talk about making leaves. How would you do it? How do you make really simple leaves? These are longer leaves in a tulip. So let's talk about how you do that. I'm going to use a darker color so you can see it better. And again, I don't have a really thick brush, but it does have a fairly decent point. Okay, so lots of different leaves you can do. Let's talk about probably this most simplest, most common leaf. You would start out with very light pressure. That's making a stem. Then you would press down and lift up. Okay, that's how you do a very simple leaf. So I'm starting with the stem, pressing down, lifting up. And you can see the longer I press and move, the longer the leaf. Let me do it again. Stem, press, lighten, 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 lift. Now that's a very straight leaf. You probably wouldn't have that, but just to give you the technique. So you start with light pressure, press, lift slowly. The slower you lift, the slower the transition will be from a fatter part to the very tip. Now, we're not going to have a stem on the tulip leaves, so we're basically going to, let's say let me turn this around. So here's the stem, all right? We're just going to come right alongside the stem, and we're going to press and lift. And that's going to give us our basic leaf shape. We're going to come along the stem, press, you can make it wiggle. Okay, that didn't come up very well. I'm just smoothing it out, but the technique, I didn't have quite enough water on that. Now I have a ton of water. Okay, so we're going to come along the stem, press, you can move your leaf and lift. So that's the basic technique we're going to use for our leaves. So let's go in and do our base layer for our leaves. We're going to come along. Actually, I'm going to do another coat on my stem, but I'm not going to do the whole thing because I am going to have my left side slightly darker than my right side. So I'm coming in, I'm doing a second coat on my stem, but I'm not really doing the whole stem. I am going to go completely under the flower though, because if there was sun, that part would be in shadow. I'm going to go ahead and do my leaves now, and remember I'm going to come along the stem, press, drag my brush, and then gently lift up. So along the stem, press. Oh, I didn't quite have enough paint there. It's all right, you can go over it. Press and lift up. I had to go over it a couple of times. I didn't quite have enough paint. Now I'm going to do a small one on my left side here, just a small little leaf. Okay. Don't be afraid to cross over if you would like. What I mean by that is having your leaves cross over or your stems, like I've done here. They're crossing over a stem, that's fine. That would be very natural. That has a lot of paint. Okay. Okay, so that's our basic leaf. I think I'm going to take I have kind of a limey green. I'm going to take that and put it in on the opposite side of my stem where it's a little bit lighter, just to give a little color variation. I think that's going to be hard to see in the camera, but I'm just trying to have it not be one single color. So if it was as though maybe the sun is coming on the right and it's slightly lighter, and I might use that same green and put that on the top of my leaf, just again to give it a slight variation. Okay, now if you want, you can go back in and you can add additional color, additional layering. You can see in this particular painting, instead of putting additional color at the bottom, I put it on the top. I did it when it was damp, so it's bleeding into the yellow. The orange is bleeding into the yellow. You can make additional lines. You could just tap a little bit of a darker color, or you could make the base darker. So it's your personal preference. How do you want it to look? A couple of other things that you might want to do if you felt like you wanted more background in here. I'll do this. I'll do a light background on this one. So there's a couple of really simple ways to add what appears to be a background. I'm taking my brush, I'm just adding water, and I'm going to go around and again, this is where watercolor paper does make a difference. This is watercolor paper. I'm going around my flowers, but I'm not going really very close. I'm not worried about that part. And then I'm going to take some light blue, and I'm just going to tap it in. And what's going to happen is that blue is going to move. The paint will move, and it's very, very light. That's what I want. See how I'm just kind of spreading it around. Just to give a little bit of color. My painting's kind of warping now because it's wet. But that's something that you can do to add just a hint. You can see there's a faint, faint, faint blue. If you want, you can come up closer with water to your flowers so the paint moves closer to your flowers. And again, that's not required. It's just something you can do. Let's see, I'll take another one and show you something else that you can do. Okay, I'm running out of my paper. Okay. So this time I might just want to add a dash of color, but I don't really want to do a background like this, but I just kind of want a little bit of color. You can do what's called splattering. So let's say I want to splatter some of that pink, or both of my pinks. I'm actually just adding a tiny bit of water because you want this really wet. I'm adding the paint to my brush, and then all I'm going to do, you can use a toothbrush to do this technique. I didn't bring one with me, so I'm just going to use a brush, but all you would do is kind of hold the brush stiffly in your hand and tap it, and that's going to splatter. You can't really see it on camera, but maybe if I do some of the darker pink, you'll see it. First, I'm going to do some of this lighter pink, and I'm going to try not to get it on my flowers. So let me just kind of block that off a little. And I'm just tapping it. And that, remember, it's going to dry lighter than what you see initially. Now I'll take some of my darker pink, do the same thing. Oh, that's a big splotch. See, I'm just adding a bit of color, not even covering it there. Okay, so look at that one big splotch. Maybe if that's too big, oh, what do I do now? I've got a mistake. I'm so sad after this whole painting. Okay, take your paper towel, put it right over that spot, and it'll lift it up. If it's still too much paint, I'm actually okay with that. I just didn't like the really super dark splotch. If it's still too dark, you can take your paintbrush with plain, clean water, go over your paint, and then lift it with your paper towel. That's another way that you can lift color. So that's a different background if you just want like a little bit of color back there, but not necessarily like a blue sky. Okay, so let's just say, oh, all right, that's great. Now what do you do with it? Well, let me show you what I do with it. Make sure that's not wet. I make a card. This one is, actually, this is not watercolor paper. This is just really a very thin cardstock. And I painted some tulips. And then this is a stamp. It says, thinking of you. And so I put the stamp on there and just kind of colored the edges. I made a card. I put it actually on a card. You could take your watercolor paper and glue it to a card and make a card just using cardstock. You could do it that way. Just so you know, this is how I do it because I've been doing cards a long time. I sign it on the back and I always do some part of the image. In this case, it was a tulip. I do that on the front. And then on the envelope, I match it as well. So it's the back is signed. You've got a bit of a flower on the back. The envelope has a tulip, and that is how I will either gift this card or use this card kind of as a little set that all goes together. So that's what I do with these smaller paintings. Anybody have a question? And before I talk about what we're going to do next time, we're doing great on time. Any question about any of our things that we did today? All right. Good. So let's talk about next time, which it's... Sorry?
Can we show you what we did? And
oh my gosh. Yes, please do. I'd love it. If we can do a, with everybody, Sean, so I can see what everybody did. And you gals show me too. Show me what you did.
I'm not really sure how to do it. Does anybody know how to do it?
Just put your card up. Oh, look. Oh, wonderful.
Put my card up. Okay, I have to get my picture.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Good. So that's mine.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it looks great. Oh, lovely, lovely. Yeah. What fabulous artists that attended this class today. Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much. Okay, so I've got another class scheduled. If you're with Renaissance, you saw it in the course catalog. If you go through ACC, it's on their website, which is, what is it, Sean? So the ACC website is accsv.org. And the class is April 12th. I actually have it on Eventbrite as well. So the class is April 12th. That's also a Wednesday. And we are going to learn a technique. This is really fun. You can do either birch trees with this or bamboo. And can you see it? Maybe can we do overhead, Sean? Because I think, yeah. So I did just an example here of a birch tree, and this is with bamboo. But I'll tell you, this technique, it's actually very quick, but it's really fun, and you use a credit or debit card. That's how you get those interesting patterns that you can see here, or you can see on this one. Let's see. So if you haven't signed up, it's a free class open to the community. Please be sure to sign up. It'll be fun. If you can't make it live, you would always have access to these programs through the ACC YouTube channel. So again, just go to YouTube, search ACC. I don't know if you need SV on that one, Sean, but search ACC, and they have, I don't even know how many hundreds of wonderful programs available on their YouTube channel, wonderful cooking classes, health classes, exercise classes, all kinds of wonderful things. So that is the end of the program today. And if there's nothing in chat, Sean, I think we're good then.
I had a couple questions.
Yes.
Like, how do you make a floppy leaf, or any watercolor brushes recommended for beginners?
I would just get a very basic set. You can use the Crayola kids set. That does not have a great brush. Really and truly, you can go to Michael's, any hobby store. What you're looking for, in my opinion, as a beginning watercolor artist, is you want something that has a fairly small tip. You don't want it just to be a full brush. This is called a round, where it looks like this. If you have a flat brush, you can do it. It's just harder. So I would just get some kind of a basic round brush like this that has a nice little tip. And you know, this honestly was probably like maybe $8. And it'll last you a very long time. Watercolor lasts a long time. Any other questions?
I have a question about the tulips that we did. How do you make them look more grounded, like in a pot or in grass or in something, rather than just coming off the page?
Okay, so you could, let's say you had a pot, so I'm just going to do this, whoops, that's a terrible pot. So here's a mistake that I see. People will do this. Okay, and that won't look natural. Okay, now I have almost no paper to write on, and I want to show you something. So if you were to do it, I would just say, make sure you have leaves, and you're not going to go with a long stalk. So if your flowers, I'm not going to do the shape, I'm just going to do like ovals, okay?
Yeah.
Remember, you want to have some nice natural curves. Not that some can't be straighter. But you don't leave all this open. You're going to fill that in with leaves. Okay?
Got it.
So when you're done, it's very full looking. And it doesn't look like you just have these stem things coming off. Does that help at all?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. And someone here talked about watercolors on sale. What was it?
Hobby Lobby has them for 40%. All their pins and paper and sets and stuff for 40% off
Okay.
this week.
Thank you. So one of our folks here in the Sacramento area said Hobby Lobby has all their watercolor supplies, pens, papers, paints, 40% off. So great time to invest in a very inexpensive set. I would say start out with all student grade. It will only get better and easier the better quality you use, but for practice and to see if you like it, start out with something simple and inexpensive.
Kathy,
Yes.
you said earlier when we got started about using an eraser. don't use one or what?
Oh, okay, so what I was talking about is after you've penciled your drawing in, if it's too dark, use an eraser to lighten your lines, because some people will do a pencil drawing like this. And if you don't mind your pencil showing through, that's fine. But if you feel like, okay, now I have the shape, but golly, I really don't want to see that much pencil, just go back over your pencil marks and lighten it. That's what I was talking about. Okay,
Yeah,
so see
thank
the
you.
one on the right is much lighter. I can still see it. I will be able to follow that, but it's much lighter and won't be as obvious in the painting compared to the other lines.
Yes, yes. I think they should have heard that before I did it, but thanks.
That's all right.
Someone wanted to see how you make a floppy leaf.
Like a leaf going over. I'm running out of, this might work. Okay, I'm not quite sure what you mean, but let's see if I can do something. So if I'm going up, I would make it thin and then go down.
Tulips. Does that look like a tulip?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so what I did is I went up, pressed, I went thin, and then I turned and I went down. Which again is nice because not all leaves go straight up. But I'm just trying to do some basic things in this session. I do try to teach some techniques. Like next time it's going to be with credit card, so you feel like, okay, I'm just not learning how to fill in the blanks. Today was a lot about perspective and trying to make sure that when you're doing something like flowers, you don't do, however many you're going to do, 3 of the identically same perspective flower. That's kind of what we were focusing on today. Okay, well, I think it's noon, so thank you everybody for your time, and I hope you have a great week, and you're all fabulous artists, and keep painting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was great, thanks.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Very nice.